Hi, everybody. Welcome along to episode 155 of Percussion Discussion Podcast. As you can hear, I haven't got much voice, so I shall do my best to get through this. As always, please check out all of our social media. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook, and of course, our world famous YouTube channel, where you can find all of our conversations, past and present, with the videos to accompany. So please subscribe. We're nearly at the 2,000 mark now. There's no adverts, so you're not going to get interrupted. It just helps grow the channel. If you'd rather listen on the go, all of our conversations are available in podcast form. These are free to download from your favorite podcast provider. So if that's your thing, you know what to do. And again, if you can rate and review, it really, really helps like-minded drummers find us and hopefully enjoy what we do here at Percussion Discussion Podcast. So thank you for listening to that. On to today's guest, a gentleman born and bred in Luxembourg, came over to the UK in 2006 to carry on his musical studies and hopefully looking to push his career on, which you could say he's done. He's played for some incredible bands in the last few years. The Pierces, he's gone to play for Mumford and Sons, and arguably one of the biggest gigs in music, a guy who is has a critical ear for drummers. That is the mighty Sting. Arguably some of the best drummers in the world have already played for Sting, so no pressure. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome the gentleman and wonderful drummer that is Mr. Chris Maas.
Chris, thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. I've been kind of following your progress or so for the last 12 months, obviously with the gig, which we'll talk about shortly, I'm sure. So tell me, I mean, obviously, you're born and bred in Luxembourg. What's the music scene like over there? Obviously, it is a very small country. That much I do know. Is there a thriving music scene in Luxembourg?
Very much so. Yeah, absolutely. I think the music scene in Luxembourg right now is probably the strongest it's ever been, especially compared to, when I was still living there, which is now sort of nearly 20 years ago. I left to come to London, and, the educational system in Luxembourg is great, especially, the Conservatory of Music in Luxembourg is really quite a renowned for how good they are. And so I was privileged enough to go there and do all my studies there, and as a result, basically, because most people go to the conservatory who are serious about music, they go to the conservatory to study their instrument and harmony and theory, and so there's quite a high level of musicianship from the start. Unfortunately, as you mentioned, because the country is so small, we have quite. I wouldn't say we haven't got the options. That a country like Germany, for example, or the UK, France, Belgium, they all have a bigger sort of market share of the music industry, and so we struggle a bit with that. But at the same time, right now, I think, like I said, the music industry really is at its strongest. There's great musical acts coming out of Luxembourg. We were, not just in the jazz scene, because people always think of Luxembourg as a very sort of jazz-centered scene. A lot of jazz bands come out of there, but also, there's more and more sort of contemporary music, pop music, rap music coming out of Luxembourg. So it's really quite an exciting time for the country and its music scene.
Oh, that's good to hear. And was it always your intention to leave and to go to here or to LA or to wherever it may have been? Was that always the plan in your mind?
It was, but not necessarily by choice, but sort of by default, because, like I mentioned, the sort of lack of options that the country was able to give you in terms of, there's no. I've been making a living as a session musician for the last sort of 17, 18 years, which is sort of if you like, a job that doesn't really exist in Luxembourg. You can't really hold your own as a session player in Luxembourg because there's just not enough acts to work with. There's not enough producers. There's not enough work going around. So I had to look sort of elsewhere, so it was always my intention to, follow my dream of becoming a session musician. And as a result, I had to go to either Germany or most people either go to Germany, like Mannheim had a great school for pop music, Berlin, Brussels, Amsterdam, London, or if you were lucky enough to sort of have the financial means to go to America, you'd obviously go to your Berkeley's or your Manhattan Music School or something.
Oh, amazing. So when you came over here then, did you carry on with your education, or were you straight into working as a drummer?
No, I left Luxembourg with the intent to keep studying. So I had to sort of make that promise to my parents at the time. I just finished my A-levels. I really wanted to go abroad to keep studying music. And so I chose London. And I was very fortunate again to, have my parents like help me, in those first couple of years to actually, be able to afford school in London. And so I auditioned for a music college at the time, 2005, 2006. And I continued my studies there until 2008. And in 2008, I dropped out of music college to take a gap year, because at the time I was sort of frequenting the music scene in London. I was going to a lot of jam nights and meeting a lot of people. And as a result, I was offered a tour in 2008, which then sort of resulted in a couple of tours, which sort of, in a way justified me taking that gap year from music college. And the college at the time was very supportive of me doing so, because they obviously wanted to, like help you to get there eventually. That's what the sole purpose of the school was, for you to educate you to become a session musician and to go on tour. And so after I originally brought it up with the school, they were very encouraging, and they let me have that year off. And then after that year, I added another year and another one and another one. And that was, 17 years ago.
You're still
I'm technically still on my gap year. So,
So you're still a student. I like that. That's good. Keeps you young, Chris. So, I mean, obviously you mentioned, harmony and theory. So you're obviously a reader as well, a music reader. Has that helped you through the years?
It has. It has, in a way that I think it's a really important first step in anyone's musical education, to be able to learn the basics. You don't have to go too deep. You can go as deep as you want, really. But I think having the sort of basic knowledge of harmony and theory really helps you understanding the music and song structures. And, this has helped me over the years, being able to read, not necessarily just sight reading, but also like notation. For example, if you're learning a lot of new material, you want to be able to mark down, like, for example, myself, if I transcribe a set or a couple of tunes that I have to learn, I basically go back to what I learned back then, at the conservatory. And I use that sort of style of notation that is, sort of universal in the world. But at the same time, over the years, of course, I have adapted it, and sort of, I know that everyone, jots down songs in their own manner as well. So it's kind of a fun way of being able to, stay like universal in that sense, that like, I could just hand my charts to someone and hopefully they'll be able to read it. And at the same time, you know, especially in pop music, you know, everyone has their own ways of just charting, like a chord chart, or, you know, but it's definitely helped me over. I haven't done that much side reading lately, you know, especially since sort of uh, there's a lot more side reading in the sort of West End or Broadway, or, you know, if you're big band drummer, or, you know, in popular music, there's a lot less of it. You know, there's a lot more sort of, you're sort of more going off chord charts, or, you know, universal charts that are, you know, handed out to every single musician, and you just sort of, you know, go with that. But it's definitely something that I'm happy, and I'm grateful that I've learned how to do, and I should probably brush up on, to be honest, because my sight reading right now is probably not what it was.
Well, you seem to be managing okay, don't you, with the gigs you get? You know, you're all right, you're scraping through. I mean, I do lots of reading gigs. That's my father was my is the reason I read. He's a brass player, and he said, "Look, if you're going to play drums, you're going to learn to read first." So it was, I think it was 18 months, 2 years. I had to prove that I could read before getting the drums. So it's
There you go.
yeah, and it's something I've used forever. You know, did you have to learn to read from a young age, or was it like the rock stuff first and then?
No, it was very, I'm very classically trained in that sense. You know, at the time, as a young kid, I was a little bit sort of annoyed at the fact that, you know, the Luxembourgish musical education system is sort of set up very stiff. It's very old fashioned. It's very like, first you do the theory, then you do the technique lessons, and then eventually you'll get to sit down at a drum kit, which at the time was like really frustrating as a kid, you know, 7, 8 year old boy. You know, all I wanted to do was sit down at a drum kit and just play. But my teacher, my first teacher, was very adamant that I had to basically complete like a set of, I think it was 2 years of just snare drum.
Yeah.
So I played just snare drum for 2 years, reading like etudes and just technical work of just, you know, from stick control all the way to, you know, that sort of like drum roll, all that. And it was
And there it
well,
is.
there you go, there you go, there you go. And it's very frustrating, but at the same time, I can now see the benefit
Yeah.
that sort of had on my playing, in the fact that I sort of don't have to think about, and now I'm actually going back voluntarily to all these books to sort of, you know, do the upkeep of chops, and, you know, revisit old exercises and stuff, you know, something that back in the day I was just trying to, you know, fast track in order to get to the drum kit to play grooves and fills and whatnot. And but yeah, I was very classically trained in that sense, and eventually I got to actually have drum set lessons, as it was. And but the technique lessons never stopped, so I always had one technique lesson, one drum set lesson, and it was, reading was involved in both of them, so it was always sort of the combination of the two.
I think that's a great thing, and these days, I think it would take a very special young person to have that mindset to sit through 2 years of snare drum. I don't think it would happen anymore. I think it'd be
Absolutely, I agree.
extremely rare. You know, you'd lose your student within 3 weeks to be gone. You've got to give them, you know, give them some candy, as it were. You know, they want to
Yeah,
play
absolutely.
Metallica and what have you. You've got to do it, or you lose your student. Simple. You know?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's really hard. It's really hard, you know, but I can't sort of emphasize enough just how much I've benefited of having those lessons really early on in like, wasn't even my career then. It was just, you know, I liked playing drums. So against my will, having done those lessons for 2 years has really helped me even today. You know, it just, I've never had, I've been, knock on wood, I've never had you know, a problem with tendonitis or anything, which I sort of you know, put down to having the right technique and playing in the right way and knowing exactly, you know, how to hit the drum correctly. And even though my posture is not the best, but like, you know, all of this is taught at a very young age, and it's sort of it's really important for kids. Like, kids always want to get to, you know, fast track to, you know, playing their favorite song and stuff, but it's sort of important to have that sort of training and revisiting it, you know, for the rest of your career. Like, you're always going to want to, you know, learn a different rudiment or try out with something, or that's the fun of it, you know.
Absolutely. When I teach, I always say, look, you're going to hate this. The first 10 minutes, you're going to hate it. But in 10 years' time, you'll thank me for it. Because I'm pretty much,
100%.
and I didn't really do rudiments until I was a lot older. But I wish I'd had a teacher who'd showed me stuff, you know. And so I always say, you will thank me in 10 years, 15 years' time, whatever it may be. So, no, that's good. I think grounding like that is the best you can have. It really is. You can do it without, don't get me wrong, but to have that technique, and yeah, I think it's great. So, when you did your gap, however many years, 17 years, whatever it is, what was the first gig that came along for you, Chris?
The first tour I was offered was with an artist, a UK artist called Example.
Ah, right, okay.
Yeah, so this was 2008, 2007, 2008. I think it was 2008.
This would have been his early days then, really, wouldn't it?
Very, very early, very early. So he had just signed to a label called The Beats, which was Mike Skinner from the Streets.
Okay.
He had a label, and he just signed Example to this label alongside Professor Green and another couple of artists, I believe. And that was sort of the tour. He had good management, and he was in that sort of scene of, like, it was still underground. It was still like sweaty club shows, but there was a lot of shows, and it was fun. And it was my first sort of time touring with a UK artist, which was a huge deal at the time. And that tour led to us supporting the Streets in the UK for a couple of weeks. And that sort of was my first time on a tour bus, albeit a very janky tour bus, but it was a tour bus, which to me was sort of it was kind of the I have arrived,
I get that
sort of signal. You know, I thought as soon as you're on a tour bus, that means you've made it, because otherwise, why would you be on a tour bus? But I had to learn very quickly that that wasn't the case, and that I had that wrong. And so after that tour finished, I was basically still on my gap year, and I was waiting, for example, to do another tour, which didn't happen for 4 or 5 months or something. And I was basically out of work, but I didn't have the network of people, producers, managers, musicians around me at the time, because I just left school, to help me get more work. So it was a very rude awakening in a way. I very quickly realized basically that what I thought was having made it wasn't the case at all. Like, I was nowhere. I was no one. No one knew who I was. I'd done 2 tours or 3 tours, small tours, you know, of just the UK. I hadn't even been overseas or anything. And so, yeah, that was a very harsh life lesson, you know. And yeah, it was very interesting to sort of like dust yourself down, you know, get a job to make ends meet, all of that, you know, and then go back out eventually, you know. But it was very slow start, you know. I was sort of, it was a lesson that I had to learn very early on, and I think everyone hopefully should learn that lesson, that, like, you know, even if you're playing arena level gigs every night, it's just it's this sort of roller coaster nature of the job, which will see you on the biggest stage in the world one day, doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily go back there, in 6 months' time or after this gig finishes or whatever. You know what I mean? So it's a very sort of fragile environment. This being a session player, so that wasn't an easy start, but it was a very good lesson.
Yeah, I can imagine it's quite a humbling experience coming from a tour bus to having to do whatever job it was. You've got to pay your bills. It's as simple as that. And
Absolutely.
and I guess you automatically assume, and I'd probably be the same, that once you've got a name like example on your CV, oh well, they'll want to book me for this, and that's not the case.
Absolutely. And that's still to this day, I think a lot of people have that, exactly what you've just mentioned. A lot of people think of that as the reality of things, which it isn't, because people love to pigeonhole. And so people think that if you're playing drums, for example, who at the time was sort of like a hip hop act, then you wouldn't want to do a folk gig or a funk gig or a pop gig. And so I struggled with that for my whole career, which is why I jumped between a lot of different gigs, sometimes only to prove to people that I'm able to go from playing a pop gig to a jazz gig, or a funk gig to a hip hop gig, or a drum and bass gig to, a Latin gig, whatever. Like, I've always wanted, my favorite drummers in the world are always the ones that can play every style of music, have recorded with just a plethora of artists across all musical styles. And I always wanted to be that as well. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, people might not necessarily think of you as a guy who can hold a folk gig if they know you as the hip hop guy. But being a session musician in that sense is still to this day is very hard, because people just assume that if you are the drummer for Sting, let's say, that that means that you're guaranteed the next gig. But you still have to work, because every time a tour finishes, you're back in that same pool of people in London or wherever you live, with everyone else looking for a gig. You might have more sort of resources in the sense that more people, you have a bigger network of people. But at the same time, if you haven't got a gig, you haven't got a gig. Oh. So you have to go out there and do the work on the ground, and speak to people, meet people, email people, call people, all of that. So it's really important. There's never a guarantee.
And it must be a strange and quite a scary sort of feeling, when your time comes to the end with an artist, and it 9 times out of 10, it's not because the way you play, it's just people change things up. And I mean, Sting's done it so many times over the years, as we know. He's had, we'll talk about that in a minute, but the roll call of drummers before you is insane. But any gig can come to an end for reasons that it just needs freshening up, and that must be a strange feeling to know you're almost starting again. Your safety net of the tour bus and the hotels and the flights is gone, and you got to, you do it all again.
Totally. Absolutely. I think there's like I said, there's a full sense of security around the gig that you're on at the time, because when you're in the gig, the moment you're playing every night, you're not thinking about what's to come. You're not thinking about what about in 6 months' time when the tour finishes, what are you going to do? In the moment of when you have the gig, you feel untouchable. You feel invincible. And I've fallen for that time and time again over the course of my career. But I've learned now that the time to really put in the groundwork is actually when you're doing the gig, when you're on the up. It's not when you're down and you're out of work for a couple of weeks or a couple of months or whatever. Obviously, that's a given that you then have to put in the work. But in order to preempt that dip and sort of shorten the time off period that you have, because you don't necessarily know where your next work is going to come from, you have to put in the work when you're up, when you're gigging every night, that's when you need to see people. That's when you need to put the word out. That's when you need to do all that. And that sort of helps you shorten the down period. And sort of that's worked for me until now. Again, knock on wood, the second time, that, long may it continue, but, there's never a guarantee.
And these days, in the last I don't know how many years social media's been around, but especially at the moment, it's absolutely vibrant. There's so many different forms of social media. That's got to help as well. You can post your videos and this, that, and the other. People are seeing you out doing these huge gigs, with amazing, the finest musicians in the world, if you like. So that can't harm it, can it? Let's be honest. It's there for everybody to see. It's a great shop window, isn't it?
Do you know what? I do agree with you. I think for the longest time, I was sort of very skeptic of social media, especially in terms of in a professional sense of being a musician. I didn't really think that people who were giving out jobs were looking on social media. I was then proven wrong very, very sort of very early in the social media, especially Instagram, when Instagram came around. And I failed to adapt to that for quite a long time. And it wasn't really until the pandemic, where I was out of work for quite a long time, that I made that switch and sort of started to incorporate more of my professional life into my social media. And honestly, I hate to say it, but to great results. I really didn't want to. This is quite a funny story, but I was basically looking through some footage of me playing that I had on a GoPro, an old GoPro lying around. And my housemate at the time, who's one of my best friends, he said, you should put that up. And I was a bit like, no one wants to see that. I just did it for myself at the time. It wasn't even, I had never intended for it to be on social media or anything. And he helped me sort of put it all together, because I had no idea how to do that. And at the time I was looking for work. I tried everything. I sort of like, everyone remembers the pandemic, everything shut down, no gigs, clubs were closed, like venues were closed, everything. And sort of coming out of that period, I saw on Instagram that everyone I knew was back out gigging, but I wasn't. And so that was kind of sort of weird for me. So I didn't know what I'd done wrong, but for whatever reason, for whatever reason, no one's calling me up. So I was like, well, I might as well try uploading videos to social media now and cold emailing people and whatnot. So I put this video up of me playing on a show like a couple of years prior to that, and the response was amazing. And straight away, people were like direct messaging me or texting me, and it was just that sort of putting it out there for people to see, for people to remind people that you're there in a way, which is quite sad, that you have to do that via social media. But it did help, and a couple of engagements that I, then ended up playing on actually came from me posting that video, that was new to me. Where I don't agree with what you said is because the flip side of that is that a lot of drummers nowadays think that if they only upload videos of them playing to social media, that will guarantee them a gig.
Right. Yeah. Of course. Of course.
Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's sort of like, that's a really delicate point there, because just because you can play like an absolute beast doesn't mean, and you've got all the gear and you're filming yourself and all of that, you know what I mean? Like that doesn't guarantee you work. There are people in the world that have been called up for gigs because of their social media presence, absolutely. But I believe that eventually a lack of experience will always sort of interfere in a way, you know what I mean? Unless you're working with someone that like you might be able to grow with organically, it's sort of like, you're better off, like to me, you're better off going to an open mic night and just like, you know, playing your ass off there. It would jam night or anything, you know, then posting a video of you playing a cover of something online and waiting for an MD to call you for a gig. Like, but maybe I'm too old fashioned in that sense, you know what I mean? Like I said, I'm relatively new to the whole social media thing. So for all I know, kids could be, you know, out there playing the biggest gigs in the world as their first gig after just uploading a couple of videos online. So, but I personally, I always think, the face-to-face time you spent with people outweighs, the sort of, you know, professional, how should I put this? The professional sort of, in a way, you know, you're better off just keeping it to face to face. And if you want to upload videos to social media, absolutely go for it. I'm doing it as well, because the world is adapting, you know, session musicianship is adapting in that way, that if you don't do that, then people will forget about you, unfortunately. But it shouldn't be your sole, no, everything you do in a way. You know?
Of course, face to face, people are gonna get an idea of your personality. Are you gonna get on? Are you, you know, are you
absolutely
a complete asshole? Are you, you know, there's so many other elements that are needed to you know, to
totally
be. So
totally. I always say that, you know, it's really interesting you say that, because I always say that in the life of a session musician, the playing aspect is actually only, to me personally, is actually only maybe 40% of the job. And that's a side that you're completely lacking if you're by yourself filming in, you know, your bedroom or your basement or your living room, whatever, or in a studio even. And I believe that everyone should start playing an instrument in order to be able to interact with someone else. You know, that's what music is all about. It's all about interaction and conversation, you know. And when you're neglecting that sort of social aspect, then you end up with being, you know, like I said, like an absolute beast on your instrument, but you might be overqualified on that, on the technical side of things, but you're definitely underqualified on the social side of things. And because the social side of things actually outweighs the technical side on a day-to-day basis on tour, because you're only on stage for a couple of hours a day, but you're in each other's pocket for the rest of the time, which is usually about, call it 16 hours a day. You're in each other's lives, you're having dinner, you're having lunch, you're going for a walk, you're going to cinema, whatever it is, you're there together. So you need to get on, you know, and that to me is again a lesson I had to learn, you know, over the course of the last you know 16, 17, 18 years. But it's something that has really changed my perspective on how to get gigs and what you have to do to get, you know, to continue on a gig, you know, is be a good person, be positive, be a pleasure to be around in that sense, rather than just turn up and play because you know you're a beast. Like it doesn't, most artists would rather have someone who's not the best of the best, but is a good person, than they would have someone who is just off the scale, playing wise, but is an absolute arsehole. Like, that will never work. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying that everyone who's an absolute beast, by the way, is an arsehole. But I'm just using two different ends of the spectrum. Man. But yeah.
All solid advice. Now, the first time I became aware of you, Chris, was probably about 7 years ago when my good mate Mark Jeffs put a video up from Rusty Drums with you playing on, and I think it was a beautiful sounding old Rodgers kit. I can't remember which model it was, and I remember thinking, I really like this guy's playing. So, are you a vintage drum nut as well, or was that just, you were just asking?
I mean, Mark's definitely sort of an enabler in that,
Yes.
I think Mark. So Mark runs, for the people that don't know Mark runs a shop called Rusty Drums in the UK, close to Luton, call it. And it is bar none the best drum shop in the UK.
Yeah.
And Mark has run this shop out of his shed in the back of his garden when I first met him, and is now in a sort of warehouse about a 10-minute drive from where he lives. And it is just the mecca of vintage drums.
Yeah.
And over the course of the last, call it 10 years or something, Mark's definitely turned me into a vintage drum nut. Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely bought too many drum kits of Mark because he's very good at what he does.
Yeah.
And I love him to bits. And I've ended up with an incredible sort of collection of vintage drums, not just from Mark's, but also, picking up bits, in America and in Asia and everywhere along the line, Europe. But yeah, I have mainly Mark to thank for that. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
He's a bad man. He really
He's
is.
a bad man. He's a bad man.
So, look, we must talk about your current gig with the mighty Sting.
Yeah.
I mean, where do you begin? I mean, first of all, I mentioned before about the drummers that have gone before, from Stuart Copeland up to Josh Freese, and there's another drummer as well who was after Josh, and his name escapes me.
Zach Jones.
Zach Jones, a wonderful drummer, yeah. So all those names come up, and then you're asked to do the gig. What goes through your mind when you think back at Vinny and Manu and all the
What goes through my mind?
Yeah, are you just like, that's cool, I'm all right, I'm in, or is there
no
any doubt?
Yeah, no, it was pure panic. It wasn't did I have a doubt? I had pretty much nothing but doubt at the time of when I got the call. Yeah. I think that if you get that call and no part of you has a meltdown, then there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
Because, as you mentioned, the people, I like this, people always say, if you follow someone else on a gig, you're like, big shoes to fill. There's that saying, big shoes to fill. Well, with this gig, I like to look at it like a shoe rack. Yeah. There's a whole rack of boots outside that door. And when you rocked up on this gig and you see Stuart, Omar, Vinny, Keith Carlock, Abe Laboriel, Manu, Josh Freese, Zach Jones, I'm pretty sure I've got them all. I might be forgetting some, but that's insane for any drummer to step into that sort of environment and just be like, confident to walk into the room and be like, yeah, all right, me next. What's up? You know, that's just not who I am. So as flattering as it was to get that call, I did absolutely panic, and I had to sort of call on my partner, who did an amazing job in sort of reassuring me that I should, should at least try it. And, I'd worked with him once or twice before I got the call to actually, to be in this trio, as it was. Yeah. And I'd always thought that I'd done a good job on the occasions that I'd worked with him, but I never would have thought in a million years that he would have, thought, let's go back to a trio and get that guy in. That was a rogue call, I thought. But obviously, it's, as you know, like any drummer on this planet, he could call up any drummer and they'd say yes, probably.
Of course.
And so, to get that call, I was so fortunate and so humbled by that I didn't think twice. Like, I obviously said yes before he finished his sentence. But then I did go home and I did panic. Yes.
Did Sting himself ask you to be in the band, or was it management?
He did it himself. Yeah.
That's great. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. He took me for lunch. Yeah. Weird. Super weird. He took me for lunch and then sort of pitched me this idea of scaling back his band that he had at the time, which were fantastic.
Was Rani on percussion at that point?
No, there wasn't a percussion player, but it was a 7-piece, I believe, and Zach was playing, and so he was toying with the idea of basically scaling it back to originally a 4-piece with keys, and then he went one step further. He said it wasn't drastic enough of a change, so he needed to be braver. So he said, "I want to do the trio." And even over lunch, I was like, that sounds fantastic. Who are you going to call? Because I didn't really know why I was there to have lunch with him in the first place. So it was sort of like this weird sort of Black Mirror episode where I was just, I was like guessing. I was like, oh, you're gonna call Vinny, or are you gonna call Manu? And he was like, no, I was gonna see if you want the job. And then I was gobsmacked. It was insane. It's the moment I will forever, that's the moment you dream of when you start working in this industry or playing an instrument, or, if you ever want to be a session musician, like, you always dream of that one moment where that will just be etched into your brain for the rest of your life. And that to me is one of a few, but like that is definitely the number one spot.
I say this a lot. I speak to lots of drummers who've played some amazing gigs, as you are at the moment.
Of course.
And I always like the idea of, telling a 10-year-old Chris that you were going to get asked by Sting to join his band. And what would 10-year-old Chris have thought of that? It's insane, isn't it?
It's honestly, I still, even now, having done a year's worth of, gigs together, every time I step on stage and he's on stage and Dominic Miller, who's the guitarist, when I see the two of them and I just sit behind my drum kit, I'm like, this is crazy. Like, this is genuinely crazy. The fact that I get to play with these incredible musicians every night and, be sort of like an integral third of a trio that gets to tour the world playing these iconic songs. It does not get better. It really doesn't. Like, I think it's the most wanted gig in the world, probably, for me anyway. It always has been. I was reminded by someone the other day that I did an interview in 2006 or 7 or something. No. Yeah, when I first left Luxembourg, I did an interview with this like super small note like Luxembourgish newspaper, because they were like, "Ah, you're moving abroad to do." Anyway, they asked me what my dream gig was, and I said Sting.
Wow.
So this isn't something that call it law of attraction or law of the universe or whatever, power of the universe, but this is genuinely something that I've been sort of visualizing and putting out there for a very long time, which probably is the reason I got it. But it's definitely from a very, very young boy. I've always wanted that gig. I've always, my dad brought me up with the music of the Police and then Sting and other bands, but that was always like, I remember listening, to countless hours of his music, and to now be in on stage with him, it's proper mind fuck. Honestly, it's crazy.
Tell me, Chris, how excited were you to break the news to your dad that you'd got the gig?
Oh.
I mean, isn't that a beautiful moment to have that opportunity to, he must have
Absolutely
been blown away.
He really was. Yeah. I at the time it was sort of like, it was December of 2023 when when I had the conversation with him and his manager, and then his manager and I put our heads together and worked out a deal, and I signed that deal just before Christmas. So sort of like a week before Christmas. And I didn't tell my dad because I knew that basically, like, I would see him just before Christmas. So when I got back to my parents' house, I waited, and I waited to tell them in person, and my dad was just, lost his mind. My mum cried. It was a whole thing. Like, yeah, it was beautiful. It was amazing. It was amazing. Yeah,
that's lovely. And obviously, he hasn't done a trio probably since the Police days. And was that something that excited you, or were you a bit kind of, oh my God, how's this going to work? Because obviously, a lot of Sting's material is known to having keyboards and strings and lots of percussion, and all of a sudden that's not going to be there. I'm assuming there was no or few tracks being used. If he wanted a stripped down approach, you're not going to all of a sudden put tracks in, are you?
That's very true. And honestly, it was sort of again, I just went back to panic mode. It was when he said a trio, I was like, wait, you've waited all this time, to go back to a trio. I was like, oh, you should have done this back in the day, with Dom and Vinny or whatever. I mean, like, I was just in my head. I just got straight into my head, and because imposter syndrome in situations like that is crippling. Like, really, it's like, oh God. But then I very quickly sort of turned this around, mainly because his manager, Martin, and Sting himself were very, very encouraging of me and my playing and who I am as a person. So I thought, all right, well, if they believe in me, then maybe it should be me. Maybe I can do it. Maybe I should start believing in myself. Because up until that point, I'd never not believed in being able to sort of deliver on a gig, or, being able to play something, or, I know my limits very much. But at the same time, it wasn't really until, Sting asked you to be in a trio where I was like, yeah, nah, I'm not good enough for this. And then, but because of how reassuring Martin and Sting both were, not just that lunch, but also, after that on the phone and everything, that sort of gave me confidence. It gave me confidence that I could grow into the role as his new drummer potentially, and that I would learn on the job. And, I knew I had a lot of homework to do, don't get me wrong. And I wasn't wrong about that either. But I knew that I sort of slowly grew into the role of being comfortable, being his new drummer, which still sounds weird. Don't get me wrong, still sounds weird, but it's but the trio was really, to answer your question, sorry, the trio is really the cherry on the cake. I don't get me wrong, I would have done it, as the 7-piece, no matter what the configuration of the band was. I would have done it anyway. I would have been there with bells on, but at the same time, doing it as the trio for the first time since the Police was really, that was the cherry on the cake. And at the it sounds weird now because we've just finished a year of touring and in Europe, in the UK, and in the States, and it the reviews have all been really good, which helps.
Of course,
I'm sure there's some bad ones, and I'm sure there's some people that say it's shit and that I'm shit and that it should be Stuart and it should be Vinny. I don't necessarily disagree with them, but at the same time, because he's happy and because we're having a great time, he's happy to just keep going and to just continue sort of exploring this new trio and what it can do, and all of that. So to me, that's sort of really like it wasn't until we finished touring last year where I was like, I think I've landed on my feet here. I think I'm now at a point where I'm like comfortable and where I can actually like relax and, play a bit freer, and because he's very encouraging of that as well, so, but for the first couple of tours, well, not tours, but for the first couple of shows, like say 8-10 shows, I was very, I just wanted to do right by everyone that came before me. So I was just very,
as in fills and bills and everything.
Oh, everything. I'd learned like every fill from every version of every song that you can think of. It was, and he didn't really like that. He just wanted me to be me, which I love. But at the time I was like, Stuart played it this way, I can play it this way. Or there's a tour you did when you did the Soul Cages tour, like on your own stuff, you played it this way, and Manu did this, and Vinny did this, and he was like, can you just be you? Like, just play it how you would play it.
I suppose, harking back to your meeting over lunch, he's asked you to be in the band because he likes the way you play. And that's the biggest compliment on earth, isn't it? When Sting says, I like your playing, I want you to be you. Hey.
Yeah.
It's huge.
It is. But at the same time, I think, my honestly, like the people that came before, like the sort of, I always like to call it like the Mount Rushmore drummers, which is basically what he had before me, and a lot of my favorite drummers in the world are drummers that came before me on this gig, be like, honestly, like Vinny probably being like the top, I've watched countless hours of Vinny playing with everyone, what I mean? But like Vinny to me is the truth. Like he really is everything I love about drums, so I've stolen a ton of stuff, from listening to him, how he played certain songs, how he, transitioned from one song to the next, all of this, like, so inevitably there's some of that in there. Same with the Police and Stuart, how can you not play that one fill that everyone knows when the time, what I mean? So I was like, well, I have to play it. I have to do right by Stuart. Not that he cares, but there's definitely moments, and I've actually recently watched. I watched the Rick Beato video of him and Josh Freese, and I also watched the Stewart video, and then I actually sat down with Josh in LA a couple of months ago, and we laughed about it because he came to see the show when we were in LA, and we laughed about it because I mentioned to him that he mentioned that same thing of playing this certain Tom thing on his one song anyway, and Sting told him not to do that, which he does all the time, because he doesn't really want you to play the song the way that maybe Stewart played it on the record. He wants the song to be this breathing organism that just changes, is ever, evolving. And I love that. But at the same time, because I grew up, and I'm sure, Josh did as well, grew up with this music of the Police. Whenever it comes to that point in the set, I hear that feel in that one song because it's inevitable. You've heard it a gazillion times. So, I try and sneak in the odd Stewart feel every now and again, but it's really phenomenal to see how he still, to this day, like every sound check, he changes tunes, changes rhythm, changes harmony, changes melody, changes arrangements, like every day. It's amazing. Like he never stops. It's so inspiring to me to see that someone still has the drive to do that, every day on songs that everyone knows, are like iconic tunes. It's fantastic.
Wow. And I've been dying to ask this because whenever I've seen Sting with Vinny once, and then I've watched so much footage, even back in the Police days, it always appears that Sting is very much on the front foot with his bass playing. He likes to drive almost as much as the drummer. It always gets that impression that he's pushing. Is that the case, or am I totally talking out of my backside?
You're not talking totally out of your backside. No, he is definitely, he's a punk bass player. You know what I mean? Like when he wants to, he has this sort of like, I personally love his bass playing the way that I love Paul McCartney's bass playing. It's sort of very melodic, but then in other songs, it's so driving. It's proper, like, what the Police were at the time, which is basically like, punk rock. So that sort of drive, he still has that to this day, and which is why a lot of songs are to click, but other songs are also not to click, and I follow him because he's the band leader. So whatever he does, I do. But at the same time, he has this incredible ability to sit on top of the beat without rushing, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
You know how the beat, like you can sit on top, you can be in the middle, you can be behind. Well, he sits on top for sure. And he leads the band. So the more he leans to the front, the more Dom and I basically have to follow him. You know what I mean? And that's usually, especially, on songs like So Lonely, for example, is a classic example of that song that sort of, if you shape a classic pop tune, that usually you ramp up the chorus by a few BPM in order to, elevate the energy a little bit, and then you sort of come back down maybe in the second verse, or you might come back down in the mid late if it's a down mid late or whatever. Well, he does that, but he does it in real time, and he does it the same every night, to the point where I know he's played these songs, I don't know, over 1 million times probably, but like, it's just amazing to know and to witness that someone can be so metronomic, but free at the same time, because there's no click. So he just, it's in him. The time that he plays, it's just him, and it's really cool. It's really cool, but it's definitely that sort of punk energy that I love, because that's the music I grew up with. So it's like, yeah.
That's cool. Was it uncomfortable at first to get used to, or did you kind of drop straight into it?
No, it was sort of like any gig, any new gig, you always have to learn the ropes. You have to learn how different artists do different things. So like, some artists might have like a very elaborate playback setup with like laptops and, running the show of Ableton and whatnot, you know what I mean? So that's one gig, which I've done, and it's very gridded. It's very sort of like, you know exactly what you're going to get every time code flying back and forth between, lights and front of house and the stage and whatnot. So that's a very different gig. This is very, very old school. And I haven't done a gig like this in quite a bit, where some tunes have click, some tunes have the occasional backing track, like, Desert Rose, for example, has that melody line. That iconic melody line is on track. Don also plays it, so it's like doubled, which makes it sound really cool. But other tunes just don't have anything. Most of the set has no backing track. Some have click, but like most of it is literally just plug in and play. Which, if you're in front of an arena full of people and there's only 3 of you, that was new to me. That was a new dynamic. I know that he's done it with the Police, like, and stadiums and even much bigger. But for me to just be up there, the only time I played in a trio was, sort of a matinee jazz gig at a restaurant or something, you know what I mean? So that was it's a big challenge, because you can't hide, but you still want there to be space. You don't want to fill the space too much. So it's really interesting to learn the ropes in a trio that plays big shows like that, because, automatically you think, there's only 3 of us, everyone has to play all the time. And it's like, actually, that's not true. It's very cool.
That's the attraction of it, isn't it? From the audience.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, it's incredible. And tell me, Chris, what have you got coming up in this year, 2025? Now we're into it. Where have you got more stuff for Sting happening?
Yeah, I have actually. Yeah, I'm really, I'm really chuffed. Like I said before, like he just sort of, said, everyone's having a great time. Let's just keep going. So we actually, put some dates on sale, and we're going South, like we're basically doing all the markets that we didn't get to do last year, which I'm super excited about. And part of, like, we start in South America, which is always, such a treat to be able to go down to South America, like Brazil and Argentina and Colombia. Like, we're doing the whole continent pretty much. And then we go back to Europe. We do a bunch of European dates. We do a bunch of American dates. Then we go to Asia. We do like Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, all of that, which is amazing. Again, every time a tour goes to Asia, for me personally, it's just such a highlight, because I haven't been there often enough, but I really love the different cultures of different countries and stuff. So really chuffed that we'll get to go there and go to South Africa. We do a couple of dates over there, and then we finish in the UK, I believe.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we finish in the UK. I think there's three London shows and a bunch of shows around. There'll be some festivals as well in the summer and stuff, but like, it's shaping up to be like a really busy touring year, which, I'm obviously like over the moon that I get to just continue this journey, alongside, 2 of the greatest. So yeah, I'm really, really chuffed.
Wow. Well, I honestly, I take my hat off to you, Chris. You've got the dream gig. Life is
mate,
good.
thank you.
And I honestly, I can't thank you enough for doing the podcast. It's
of course,
appreciated.
Thank you so much, mate. Thank you for having me. It really means a lot. Thank you for
so happy touring and safe travels, and hopefully catch you very soon. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much, mate. Thank you.
Bye-bye.